Hello and welcome to this webcast on pivoting from in-person to online teaching. My name is Will Moore. I work with the Life Sciences group at Macmillan Learning, and I'm here today to welcome you to our talk with Rob Lue. Our audience today represents instructors across a wide variety of areas of study, so I'm excited to have you all today. We're really going through an unprecedented time in education right now, and while this poses a great challenge for everybody, it's really inspiring to see so many talented educators looking for resources to educate themselves in an effort to do the best for their students. This is take two of this talk. We tried this initially as a live webinar and had some technical glitches due to the number of people we had on there, just kind of overwhelmed the system. So we decided to do another take as a recorded version that we can distribute widely and make sure everybody gets the information they need. So our speaker today will be Rob Lue. He's a professor of molecular and cell biology at Harvard University, and he's also the director of Harvard's Bach Center for Teaching and Learning, as well as the founding faculty director of HarvardX. So today, Rob will give a talk on transitioning from the brick and mortar classroom that we're also used to an online environment, and doing so in a short amount of time. Although he will share some specifics about what he has done for some of his biology courses, he goes over a lot of general information, and all of this stuff is broadly applicable to really a number of different disciplines. So before we get started, I'd just like to point out a few resources here at Macmillan that we can help with. We serve a wide variety of course areas with our content, and we have a number of online courseware platforms such as Sapling, Launchpad, and Achieve. We also have the iClicker classroom response system, which can be used remotely as well. So all of these are great tools. If you are looking for content out there or looking for materials to help you, I'd encourage you to take a look at what we have. You can go to our website at macmillanlearning.com. And if you need specific information about some of our products, I'd encourage you to go to the Contact Us and find your local rep, and they will be able to help you out with whatever you need. Once Rob gets into his talk, he does mention a few things that I'd like to just point out where you can find them. Both of these can be found on Google. Derek Bach Center for Teaching and Learning, I said, is his group at Harvard that he leads. There are a lot of open resources on here that you can find, so I'd encourage you to visit there. And then the next one is Lab Exchange, which Rob gets into in some depth later on. And again, a lot of open resources there as well. So now, without further delay, I'd like to pass the stage to Rob and let him talk through his experiences and share some of his knowledge with you. So thank you very much for joining us today.
Hello, everyone. It's Robert Lue here. I'm terribly sorry that with the number of participants in the webinar we were having a couple of days ago, it turned out that it crashed the system. So what I'm going to try and do is actually record some of my thoughts and share them with you by recording a Zoom meeting. So in some ways, what we're doing is exercising some of the methods that perhaps some of you might use in terms of teaching online, and that I'm certainly using when I'm teaching online as well. So what I'm going to do is turn on my screen sharing, and I will share with you a specific browser, and we will use that as our presentation tool for this discussion. Okay. So what I'd really like to do is spend some time with you talking about this amazing process so many of us are undergoing right now, which is pivoting from in-person to online teaching. Now, I'm very comfortable with online teaching, but I have to admit this is the very first time I've taken a course, a brick and mortar course, in midstream, and in the course of a week, converted it and done the pivot to online teaching. So what I'm going to do is to share with you some of my direct experiences, some of the ideas that really came out of this process of a very hectic week to 10 days of preparation. And maybe we can pull out of that some key principles that you might find useful. So here we are, trying to figure out how do we pivot from in-person to online teaching. So, of course, we need to get started somehow. And what I found in terms of my own experience is that getting started really was an opportunity for me to take stock of my learning objectives. So in other words, what were my aspirations, not just for my course overall, but for each of my lectures and for each of these assignments, pieces, if you will, of the course that went together. The real advantage of this, instead of focusing simply on topics and coverage, is that once you have a clear picture of your learning objectives, in other words, what are the students supposed to get out of it? What are they supposed to be able to do afterwards? Then you can really focus on those objectives and really try to understand what are some alternative methods online that you could use to meet those objectives. So for me, fortunately enough, each of my lectures, each of my sessions, and every assignment has a series of learning objectives. And so I had a very strong starting point in terms of how to think about what would have to happen next in terms of the transition to online. Something else I would really recommend is try to understand your students' new living and learning situations. So Harvard University sent home all of our students. And what we have to realize is that students are going home to very different situations. We're fortunate enough to be a college that's primarily residential. And so there's a consistency in terms of the living and learning environment that we play a critical role in controlling. But even if you have a lot of students that are commuters, in the midst of the pandemic, there are a lot of things happening at home that we can't even begin to imagine. We have students that are going home to situations where they cannot find a quiet room. There are students going home to situations where the internet bandwidth is quite low. So it's really important for you to understand what's happening with your students, and if they've gone home, to even understand what time zone they might be in. So one of the first things I did was to survey my students to find out, what is your situation? What's your time zone? How is your internet? Do you have enough control of your environment to have a quiet space at a regular time or a regular set of times for you to work? It's important for you to understand those things, because once you have your objectives lined up and then you start to think about what your students might do, you need to understand whether or not they stand a chance in hell of doing it. And so that's really crucial. Thirdly, in terms of getting started, I had to sort of knock out of my head the temptation to try to replicate. So in other words, instead of sitting down with my syllabus, sitting down with what I did each week and trying to figure out, okay, how do I replicate A, B, C, and D? Instead, once again, looking at the objectives, reimagine how you might do them in a way that is not only meaningful and hopefully effective in your view in terms of your objectives, but as importantly, in a way that is possible for your students. Will they have the quiet time? Will they have the ability to print something out? Can you expect your students to go somewhere to get materials to do some sort of a kinesthetic activity? All of those things have to be considered in the context of what is unfortunately an evolving new normal, not just for our students, but for ourselves as well. Then finally, in terms of getting started, take stock of all of your digital tools. For your school, what is the learning management system or LMS that you're using? Is it Moodle-based? Is it Blackboard? Is it Canvas? What really does your school provide in terms of web conferencing? Are you more focused on Google Hangouts? Are you more focused on Skype, on Zoom? And I think it's fair to say at this point that Zoom is the growing gold standard in terms of this specific moment. And don't forget your social media platforms. So for example, are there interesting things possible through Facebook, through YouTube? So for example, I'm using YouTube right now interconnected with other platforms as a way to get real information out to my students in a timely manner. So thinking about these four things for me was incredibly useful in terms of understanding, okay, how to get started. So what happened next? Okay, well, let's think about this conversion process or this transition from classroom to virtual. So one of the first things I did was to think about my classroom sessions and to understand what are the objectives, but also to realize that you might have several objectives, all of which are met or that unfold in the context of your brick and mortar classroom, but potentially in a virtual setting, it may be worthwhile for you to unbundle them. So in my class, it's kind of a combination of short stints of lecture combined with active learning activities like polling, think, pair, share, jigsaws, debates in groups with shareouts, things like that. And so all of those things can take place in one brick and mortar classroom, in my case, in a span of 75 minutes. What can you do online? And can you really think about one experience that gives you the ability to bring all of those things together? I have to tell you, from my experience, it was impossible for me to find one modality that could match exactly everything I could do basically within the four walls of a brick and mortar classroom. So what I found is that unbundling them was really important for me. And part of that unbundling for me was separating two key components that happen in my classroom. One is the broadcasting of content, knowledge and skills training, right? So basically the delivery of information. The other was the application of said information in the context of some kind of engaging active learning activity. I can do both in the classroom and break them up and intersperse them. And I think interspersing is a very important idea, and I'd ask you to hold on to that. But what I found was that, in fact, by separating them and having sort of different modalities online, I could, in fact, achieve that same kind of synthesis. So specifically what I did leads into the second issue, is I combined live synchronous things using Zoom as the live web conferencing platform, and asynchronous learning using an interspersing of video with formative assessment. And I'll talk about that more in a few minutes. But the idea there is unbundle what you have done traditionally. Think about what works best for what you're trying to achieve. So I found that, for example, video and online assessment worked really best for content delivery and skills development. And the live synchronous in real time Zoom conferencing was really what I needed for the active learning pieces. So now my students experience both in conjunction with each other. One, they do it at their own pace, the asynchronous material, and the other one, in a shorter period, they come and spend time with me. So that instead of 75 minutes together, what I've basically done is roughly 30 minutes, of asynchronous learning and 45 minutes of live synchronous learning. So then the final step that I did was I kind of stepped back from everything I would have the students do in terms of their assignments, problem sets, other activities. And I carefully tried to add up the number of hours that I would be expecting them to spend on my course. And then I made a clear, in my mind, sort of decision to reduce the number of hours by about 30 or 35%, roughly a third. My reason for doing this is that our students are going back to, as I said before, very varied situations. And I hate to say it, but I think the news certainly speaks to this. We have yet in the United States to really see the full scope of the coronavirus pandemic. So given all of that, given that students are struggling and their families are struggling with a significant kind of adaptation, with creating a new normal that works for them, I don't think we can reasonably expect them to spend as much time as they would if they were living on campus or they were commuting from home where everything was normal and hunky-dory. So I made the decision to reduce the number of hours per week by about a third, because I think ultimately the sanity of our students and the well-being of our students is the priority in this specific crisis. So the next step for me was to really think about, how do I keep what our students are doing both active and interactive, highly engaging? In my view, the last thing you want to do is record a whole bunch of videos of you just looking at them, send that off to them, tell them to look at it, and they do problem sets online. I mean, that is really not engaging, right? You really want to keep that sense of active engagement and indeed that sense of community alive. So what I did was to look for a number of sort of modes of digital assignment that would allow for students to explore in their own time with a significant component of student agency. I really thought about interleaving what would be video, and don't get me wrong, video is a piece of this, but interleaving video with formative assessments. So that I've tried hard to not have a video piece for my students that's longer than roughly 15 minutes. Most of them are about 10 minutes. If I could get it down to 6 minutes, I would do that. But we only have so much time to chop up video recordings. So the Zoom recording that you're seeing is actually an example of what I do for my students in terms of a short video, and then I intersperse it with formative assessments. And I'll show you a platform that I'm using to do that. And then once again, this is where the live synchronous discussions and sessions are so important. You want to maintain class community. The class that I'm teaching this semester and that I've just transitioned to online has 80 students in it roughly. So 80 students, and I thought to myself, boy, 80 students in a Zoom meeting, that's going to be really horrible. In fact, it's great, and we have a really fantastic time. And what's interesting about it is that it helps us maintain class community. We can share how things are going. Students turn on their cameras and can see each other. The chat on the sidebar is going all the time. My teaching fellows are there answering questions in chat while I'm talking with students live. And also we have the ability to integrate real-time polling with something like iClicker. And also in Zoom, you have the ability to create breakout groups. So when I ask my students to do something, I actually will break the class of 80 into a series of roughly 12 to 15 groups with random assignment. They have to discuss something. I put them into groups for like 10, 15 minutes, pull them back together, and then one person from each group has to do a report out in terms of what they concluded. All of this is working remarkably well in Zoom. So don't think it's not possible. You have to maintain community. Our students, and frankly, we need as much community as we can get in this period of social distancing. And so this is one way we can do our part to make sure that our students don't feel truly isolated and adrift in this very difficult moment. And quite frankly, it helps me feel less isolated and adrift, quite frankly, from my students. So what I'd like to do, though, is share with you some of the things that I did that had to do, for example, with kinds of digital assignments that really allow exploration and student agency. So in full disclosure, I have something of a leg up on this because I am a lead author on a book called How Life Works. And because, as some of you may know, I'm very committed to things digital, there's a significant kind of a digital component that I designed for How Life Works that, quite frankly, I'm thrilled that I'm able to take advantage of it as fully as possible. So with the How Life Works book, it sits in a learning management system called Achieve. You might have Canvas, you might have Blackboard, there is an ebook. But what I designed for this is something that I thought would really give students the ability in biology, and I'm a cell biologist, as you probably have figured out by now, and it allows me to really give them an experience where there's a lot of exploration. So I'm able to assign this to students in some interesting ways. So what we're looking at here is really one section of the ebook, but then here we're looking at a specific structure in the cell called the transcription bubble, part of the process of transcribing DNA into RNA. But what we created, what I sort of designed, is something called a visual synthesis map. And so we can jump from what is your typical figure, and here we see the same figure replicated. But now we're able to read information about it. We can click on the presence of a transcription complex. We can click on to show CpG methylation. But what's really important is that this now sits in a coherent, overarching complex that is in fact a visual synthesis of a mammalian cell. So taking the idea of the Google map, what I've created is an exploratory environment where students can use the cues that they're accustomed to from a Google map and actually go in and explore various parts. And as you go in, you see more and more information. You can layer in things like kinds of animations that are highly complementary. There's always complementary text. But what's great about this is that this gives students really the opportunity to, on their own, explore a biological space in a way that really works for them, right? So they can do it in the sequence they want. And it's an opportunity to layer concepts in an entirely coherent kind of environment. I think Will Moore probably told you at the beginning of this recording how to get in touch, with Macmillan Learning so that perhaps you can get access to some of these things. But I think what this allows us to do is give students assignments that give them a lot of freedom in terms of what they can explore. Now, what's very important here as well, however, is this notion of student agency. So we also have these things called tours. So we created for you, so I designed 2 tours that in a way you can do free form exploration as you see fit, but then you could also start a tour which focuses on the flow of information from genes to proteins. There are 9 steps, and now you can click through each of those steps, and it basically leads you through a narrative that uses the various steps of the map as a way for you to learn and synthesize together a variety of concepts. Now, this is, I'll be honest, a rather elaborate and incredibly powerful sort of a digital asset. This is something that you could do with your own topic, no matter what it is, by putting together a sequence of images. So what I'm encouraging you is to try to communicate and tell narratives online using a series of sequences of graphical images, perhaps, that you might have pulled from a variety of sources, and actually intersperse it with questions and information where indeed you can even turn this into an assignment, where instead of you actually delivering a tour, your students need to put a tour together. It could be a PowerPoint deck and send that off to you. It could be a sequence in a PDF. So we can actually allow students to do this, in this kind of structure. So up here you see a button called Customize a Tour. Once you go in, you can create a tour, you can name it, and once you name it, so test, you can then go next, and then you can choose the specific stops that you want. You can choose a stop by basically looking and say, okay, let's start with that. And there you go. And this is something that you can do as an instructor to create your own tours, or you can ask students to do this and they can share the output with you as a kind of assignment. So this is the notion of giving your students agency, and instead of simply delivering and broadcasting content to them, force them to use the content that you have handed off to them to tell a story, to tell a narrative. So I'm having my students do this using the visual synthesis maps. But frankly, in another course that I'm teaching where I don't have the maps, they're not the appropriate sort of topics, I'm also having them do that, essentially doing sort of a visual assembly from the textbook resources that they have online. So this notion of interactivity, I think, is highly important. The other issue that I mentioned before was this issue of interleaving content delivery with formative assessments. So what I've been able to take an advantage of, and once again, I'm sort of revealing something that I've been extremely involved with, is taking advantage of a platform called LabXchange. This platform just launched 2 months ago, and in full disclosure, it's a platform that I've launched, sort of anchored at Harvard. It's entirely free and entirely open. And in full disclosure, I'm using LabXchange to teach my cell biology course, which I've had to transition to online. And so what LabXchange does, it gives you the ability to intersperse things that you're found either in the LabXchange library or things that you're found sort of online. So what you can do is anyone can create a class on LabXchange. And this is literally the class that will slowly grow and develop in terms of assets as this course goes on for the rest of the semester. Here are my 85 students. And what I've done is you can set up LabXchange in a way that you create a sequence of things that students do. So I gave them the revised sort of syllabus. And so far we've had 2 classes, one on Monday and one today, that we've done in terms of our transitioned online form for MCB 64 cell biology in the world. But this principle of interspersing that I mentioned is illustrated by what I've created for each of my traditional lecture sections. So lecture 13 that I would have delivered in 75 minutes in a classroom, normally on March 25th or today, what I've created is in fact what I call a pathway. So I have selected things from the LabXchange library and I've recorded my own videos. So for example, here's a first sort of a video that I did. And as you can see, it is the same sort of Zoom style video. So there I am going on and on, blah, blah, blah. But the next step in the sequence is a formative assessment, right? Where I ask them to sort of apply the ideas that they have. And then they go into the next step, which is another short video, only 10 minutes in length. So as you can see, what this allows you to do is create kind of an experience for your students that allows them to intermingle things and really gives you a pathway that allows you to tell a story. I've also been able to upload the slides, which I used in all of my videos. And I've also uploaded the slides from the live session that I did with them this afternoon. So basically in one place, they get the learning objectives for that specific lecture. And then they have this interactive sort of series of things that they do where they move from one modality of engaging material to another. And for years of actually doing some research on this, what I found is that the transition of modality from lecture to active learning to a poll, back to lecture, to an assessment, to a video, those transitions really help students focus, and it allows them to exercise their thinking in some truly creative ways. So all of this that I've done on LabXchange, I should tell you, is entirely free. It's entirely free. As long as you register and create an account, you can create a private class for your students. You can assemble things like this. I did all of this just using the freely available resources on LabXchange. And you can really do a lot in terms of creating a very interesting experience for your students. So what you can see then is that as the semester now unfolds, what this will allow me to do is in fact keep my students together, and I can modify each of these as time goes on and add more material. So next week, there will be another 2 of these for students to use. And then the last thing I'm going to show you, using an example from LabXchange, but it doesn't have to be LabXchange, is the notion of thinking about the arc of things that you might end up doing with your students. So one of the things that I've really focused on with Lab Exchange is trying to create simulations for hands-on experiments. So for those of you that are biologists, you might recognize gel electrophoresis, especially if you're a molecular biologist or a cell biologist. And what we've tried to do is to create simulations with different levels that allow students to experience the scientific process. Now, I'm not showing you this because I'm thinking you're necessarily teaching biology and this might be useful for you. If you happen to be doing that, I would definitely recommend you check it out. But I'm showing you this to give you a sense of what I mentioned about an interspersed arc of activities for your students that can really help them learn. So the goal of this is to help a student experience what it is to do a gel electrophoresis experiment. You always start off with context. You then allow students to explore what the various materials are. You ask them to make a prediction, right? So where should this be? Where should that band be based on what they know? You then can allow them to go in and actually do something. So this is the simulation environment that allows you to set values, etc., open and close things, and actually run experiments as you see fit, following the guidance here. But then their results, that if you've done it, if you had actually done it, you would see results. You have students reflect on what they did, and then it summarizes for them everything that happened. So the reason why I'm showing you this is not because all of you should be doing simulations for gel electrophoresis, but for you to get the idea of a sequence of activities, maybe even using the pathway structure, where think about setting context. What are the materials or skills they're going to apply? Have them make a prediction. Have them think about what they're doing, even if they can't do it. Think about the results. Reflection is absolutely crucial, and it's critical to loop back around and summarize what happened. So what in some ways represents a little bit of a gold standard in terms of how you think about the teaching of something in a classroom session, you can actually create a version of that online using a variety of tools. So I've broken my rule about short videos. This is a very long one, but I did want to close with a couple of pointers that I'm certainly experiencing directly right now. I really urge you to remember that we're all in this together, including you and your students. And so please be prepared and be ready to adjust as conditions change. It's crucial that you keep the lines of communication and feedback open with all of your students. What I mentioned before in terms of understanding what their situation is, their situations are changing, and frankly, your situation will likely change as well. Keep lines of communication and feedback open so you can really have your finger on the pulse of what's happening. That's another reason why the live synchronous sessions are worthwhile. A second point that I had to really adjust to, don't become overly attached to any activity or assignment. There were beautiful things. I had the most beautiful sort of analog poster session activity that was done in teams with sharing and follow-up podcasts. I loved it. I loved it. I loved it. I let it go. I quickly realized that the online version to meet those objectives would be so elaborate that it would be torture for everyone. The same goes for anything new that you create. You may discover midstream that it doesn't work, or you may spend an entire weekend building something and then realize that a third of your students actually don't have the internet bandwidth to do it. Let it go. Never fall into the trap of force feeding something to your students just because you love it or you've spent a lot of time on it. It's especially true now. And then finally, and I'm trying very hard to do this, be transparent with your students. Remember, you are there to help them learn. Remind them of that fact, but remind them that you need their help to really achieve this. You're all in this together, and all of you should realize that adjustments are to be expected. We are in the midst of an unprecedented in living memory kind of situation, and so, frankly, we need to be transparent and we need to exercise a little patience with our students. They need to exercise patience with us, and moving in both directions, I think we need and could use a lot of kindness at this moment in time. So, as you saw in Lab Exchange, I have 2 classes. Monday and Tuesday, I've executed my first fully online classes. Next Monday, I'm doing an online assessment. And actually, I don't know, if you want to listen to more of what I'm saying, more ranting and raving, I might record another video that talks about assignments and how do you convert quizzes, problem sets, exams, what are the options for doing that in really an online setting. So the conversion of paper to bytes, synchronous to asynchronous in terms of examination and assignments is a whole other universe that I've really jumped into this week, as my first sort of major assignment happens on Monday, so a few days from now. So, in any case, we are all in this together. I really hope that things are going well for you. And don't hesitate. I will share with Will ways in which you can reach out to me. I'd be more than happy to talk with you about anything you might be doing. And of course, you can also reach me through Lab Exchange as well, because I have a profile on labexchange.org. So, good luck, everyone. We're all going to get through this. And I think we will emerge from this changed, stronger, and certainly a hell of a lot more creative in terms of what we do in teaching and learning. So all my best, and take care and stay healthy.